While her peers were having anti-war and anti-government protests, Donna Jean Willmott was plotting explosions. 17 years after Katherine Power and Susan Saxe, Donna would pick up where her fellow comrades and radicals left off. Just like them, her attempt to stick it to the man would result in a life on the run. Donna would spend 9 years in hiding for her crimes. But she wasn't just an ordinary outlaw. Donna would become only the 7th woman to make the FBI's most wanted list. Explosives, prison break, and undercover agents. That's coming up on Ladies Love Crime. Donna was a shy but smart girl from Akron, Ohio. Behind her oversized glasses was a determined young woman. She was vice president of the National Honor Society, valedictorian, and voted most likely to succeed at her all-girl Catholic high school. At just 5 feet tall and barely over 100 pounds, she was petite and unassuming. A friend from high school said once she came out of her shell, Donna would be a friend to anybody and do anything for you. However, things would start to change as Donna entered her senior year of high school. Her friend said the difference was night and day. Night and day, but hard to realize that on the outside. Donna joined the group Students for a Democratic Society. This same friend would note how passionate Donna was, saying, when she believed in something, she really went with it. There was no stopping her. She really strongly believed in non-U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. Donna's connection with the SDS, including its violent offshoot, the Weather Underground, would lead her to the Armed Forces of National Liberation. The group was more commonly known by its Spanish acronym FALN. They were a clandestine paramilitary organization pursuing independence for the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. This group first popped up in the U.S. in 1974 and remained active until 1985. Federal prosecutors ended up linking them to 100 planned or actual bombings that killed 8 people and injured more than 100. The group would only take credit for 10 bombings. The FALN's leader was a man named Oscar Lopez. He would finally get caught in 1981 while making an illegal left turn outside Chicago. Lopez was sentenced to 55 years on charges of seditious conspiracy. He was sent to a maximum security prison in Leavenworth, Kansas. Donna was determined to help free Lopez by any means necessary. To do this, she acquired a partner, a man by the name of Claude Marks. Together, they would embark on a daring prison break. After 3 years in prison, Oscar began to plan an escape. He openly bragged that he was the Chicago leader of the FALN, saying that he believed the only way he could win independence for Puerto Rico was by engaging in violent acts against private businesses and against U.S. government installations. He said he kept in touch with his people in the city and communicated through mail and coded telephone calls. Lopez tried getting other inmates to join his fight against the man. They agreed this was nearly impossible to orchestrate from prison and began planning an epic escape. One of his FALN contacts said they would provide a helicopter and pilot. The plan required that one of the participants on the inside of the prison be released. This means they had less than 1 year to plan the escape, and it was going to be quite elaborate. A helicopter would land in the prison yard and guards were to be held off with gunfire. The helicopters at nearby Fort Leavenworth would be disabled with explosives. After the prison break, everyone would make a living through robbery or counterfeiting. According to the plan, they would use this money to blow up buildings and kill people. They eventually found an inmate who could help them get weapons. They needed a lot. In the list, they asked for fragmentation grenades, smoke grenades, phosphorus grenades, 8 M016 rifles, 2 silencers, 50 pounds of plastic C4 explosives, 8 bulletproof vests, 10 blasting caps to use with plastic explosives, and 1-30 shot clips for use with automatic weapons. One of the inmates involved was an informant, and he told the FBI what Oscar was planning. Agents in Chicago concocted a sting operation. An undercover agent would meet up in the Dallas airport with a FALN operative that Lopez was sending. The agent showed pictures of the explosives and weapons. It worked. Within a couple of weeks, the agent received a call that the FALN member was ready to buy. The two were to meet in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Enter Claude Marks. He arrived ready to make a purchase. He bought 30 sticks of C4 explosives, costing $5,000. While the transaction was taking place, an undercover agent put a microphone inside his car. After the purchase, Claude took off, driving around town to shake off any surveillance. Finally, he pulled over to pick up Donna. They left the explosives in a locker and set out to California, the whole time talking about what they bought and why. Eventually, agents connected them to the crimes of other leftist groups. Donna and Claude realized they were being surveilled and abandoned the explosives. FBI agent W. Lane Crocker said, "They went underground in Los Angeles on May 9, 1985. That's the last time we saw them." Before long, Donna and Claude made the FBI's top 10 most wanted list, making them the first man and woman to make that list on the same day. They would remain fugitives for the next 9 years. At first, Donna and Claude got jobs and settled in the Twin Cities for about a year and a half. Both Donna's husband, Robert McBride, and Claude's wife, Diana Block, had arrest warrants out for them. The FBI only wanted to question them, believing they witnessed their escape. Donna and her husband constantly switched names and used false social security numbers. Eventually, Donna and her husband, along with Claude and his wife, would move to Squirrel Hill neighborhood in Pittsburgh. They would stay there for the next 7 years. Donna would go by the name Joe Elliott, and her husband Robert would become Tim Anderson. Their neighbors said Donna introduced Claude as a cousin. Claude's new identity would be Greg Peters, and his wife Diana was now Pat Hoffman. Here, the whole gang blended in with their surroundings. Neighbors would give them their extra house keys for safekeeping. One neighbor said, "They were soft-spoken, generous of spirit, and compassionate, the opposite of the people described by the FBI." Donna was a babysitter, a receptionist, and a computer instructor for disabled individuals. She also volunteered for the Pittsburgh AIDS Task Force. She was also a mother to her daughter Zoe. Everyone thought Donna was the perfect mother, wife, and neighbor, but they didn't know anything about their past or politics. America's Most Wanted even featured Donna and Claude on their show 4 times while in hiding, but still, no one was the wiser of who they really were. While they were on the run, federal agents would continually hound Donna's family. Her mother would get phone calls every year in December where the agents would ask, "Don't you think it would be nice if you could see your daughter for Christmas? Why don't you help us find her?" They even showed up at her father's funeral thinking Donna would make an appearance. Things seemed to be going great on the outside, but deep down they were living a lie. They wanted their kids to know their grandparents. They also were forced to suppress their political opinions and activism for fear of being caught. Donna and her husband started telling neighbors that they would be relocating to Chicago to start a video company with a cousin. It was obvious they weren't too happy about it. More and more time passed, and they still hadn't moved. When asked about the job, they would clam up. A close friend noticed that Donna was acting nervous and rattled. Something was obviously wrong. When the friend asked if everything was okay and if she could help, Donna would just say nope and thank her for asking. Finally, Donna decided it was time to come out of hiding. She started by telling this friend what had been going on and the real reason behind the move to Chicago. One day, Donna said to her friend, "Look, we need to talk to you guys one night after the kids are in bed. When can you come over?" At 9:30 that night, the doorbell rang. This was it. For the first time in 9 years, Donna was going to tell someone who she really was and what she had done all those years ago. Donna began the process of coming out a year prior. She contacted a lawyer and had been figuring out the best way for her and Claude to come forward, hopefully sparing their children and spouses as much pain and suffering as possible. After more than a year of negotiations, the pair surrendered under a tentative plea bargain. Donna was now 44 and Claude was 46. The deal took a while to work out. They were reticent to deal directly with agents, especially since they had been hounding their extended families for years. At the time, they released a joint statement saying, "After nearly a decade, we have chosen to come forward in order to resolve our legal situation. First challenged to activism by the movements of the 60s, both of us have spent all our adult lives working to change the injustices that are a part of the very fabric of society." Claude pled guilty and earned a maximum sentence of 10 years. Donna pled guilty and earned a 5-year sentence. When Claude Marks got out of prison, he became the co-director of the Freedom Archives. They described themselves as a nonprofit educational archive located in San Francisco, dedicated to the preservation and dissemination of historical audio, video, and print materials documenting progressive movements and culture from the 1960s to the 1990s. He should know a thing or two about that. A profile of him on the website says, "Claude has been involved in all the CD and video production of the archives and has continued his activism, especially in support of political prisoners." Donna also settled in San Francisco. There she got involved with the California Coalition for Women Prisoners, working alongside Claude's wife. Eventually, she ended up at Legal Services for Prisoners with Children. As late as 2017, the organization Literature lists her as a staff member. On LinkedIn, it says she is an advocacy coordinator there. She also worked on a legislative working group at the organization Prison Hunger Strike Solidarity to help pass a bill that would end solitary confinement in California. Donna was a mentor in the Ann Braden program for a while and was on the Braden leadership team in 2015. Since then, she joined the Catalyst Action Fund. A profile on their page says, "She continues to work for the freedom of political prisoners, many of whom have been in prison for 30 or 40 years. Building an intergenerational movement for a collective liberation is a high priority for her." So what's the takeaway? Everyone mellows. The radical ideas seemed all the rage when Donna and Claude bought explosives and tried to free political prisoners. However, age will make you realize there's a more peaceful and organized way to accomplish your goals. Donna grew up and lived a normal life, something that was very hard to give up. However, the pressure of living in hiding and being separated from her parents was too much. Now, instead of busting open prisons, she is working to change things from the inside out. Who knows how far she would have come if she worked on her causes all those years in hiding, let alone the time she spent in prison. Youth will make you think bigger is better, but that's not necessarily true. In her 30s, she used bombs. In her 50s, she's using brains. Take a lesson from her and work smart, not recklessly.